Good evening. Welcome to the Weekend Prime Time. We begin tonight with a potential new online star in the Democratic Party, and it is all due to a clapback to a Ted Cruz post on X. Cruz, clearly upset the GOP's gerrymandering scheme hasn't exactly gone as planned thus far, posted Friday, quote, a brazen abuse of power and an insult to democracy. 47% of Virginia voted Trump. They will now get just 9% of the seats. 52% of Virginia voters voted Harris, and they will get 91% of the seats. In response, Virginia State Senator L. Louise Lucas hit back, quote, you all started it and we bleeping finished it. The tweet is getting rave reviews from top Democrats, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who posted, this is the energy. Thank you. So Twitter.
Where's the lie?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Where is the lie in her post?
Yeah, I mean, like Twitter battles aside, the substantive point she is making seems pretty accurate to me.
And again, it's like a painful reminder for Republicans how costly Donald Trump is, because this all started with Donald Trump instigating gerrymandering in Texas. I guess he was reading the tea leaves before others have, and he's seeing that there could potentially be a blue wave come the midterms. And so he encouraged Greg Abbott in Texas to open this Pandora's box and do mid-year or mid-decade gerrymandering or redistricting. And it's created this cascade effect where in California, we saw what happened with the proposition there. We saw now what happened in Virginia. And so the Republicans have no one to blame. Ted Cruz has no one to blame but literally Donald Trump, who began this situation.
Yeah, I mean, two things. So for anyone who's new to State Senator Lucas, you should follow her on Twitter. She's really funny. I've been following her for a while, and this is not the first time she's tweeted in this flavor, just to give you a little sense. But I think the other thing here is, look, there were Republicans who warned the president and Speaker Johnson that this might happen, that there could be a backfiring, that Democrats were not just going to sit on their hands and let Texas or Indiana or any other state just run ahead and do this without at least attempting to fight back. And I mean, there were some wonks warning last week when we saw the result out of Texas with Taylor Rimmitt surprising people in North Texas, that if that kind of swing holds, some of these gerrymanders could actually send things like wildly in the Democrats' direction. That, of course, is if those kinds of swings hold. But then we're starting to see more signs, like what we saw out of Louisiana last night, that there is something happening here. Democrats seem to be finding their footing in terms of their strategizing, their willingness to fight back, from the federal level down to local representatives and state senators like this woman here.
Yeah, I think the way that I see this is like this could backfire spectacularly in two different ways that you all have pointed out. One is that you have blue states that also have unified Democratic control who can go tit for tat and gerrymander it themselves. They're like, OK, you want to play that game? We'll play that game. And then, as you point out, if there is a major wave election, what happens is in order to gerrymander, they have to like split the vote so much. They have to like create more districts where they have a very slight R+2 majority or, R+1 or whatever. And if it swings further to Democrats, then all of those narrow leads get washed away. And so you end up with more Democratic seats in the states where Republicans started this battle and tried to carve it up for themselves.
Tried to warn them, the Republicans in Texas. Some of them were trying to say, maybe I like my comfortable lead. Why are you chopping it down? But I
will say really quickly, though, that to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's point, that is the type of energy that Democrats want. There's been such a long hesitancy on Democrats going back a few years to try to use power in this absolute way, right? There's always this reluctance to say things like, oh, if we take control of Congress, we're going to expand the Supreme Court. We're going to do away with the filibuster. And there's always this sense among some Democrats like, no, we should be the party of civility and not fight power with power and try to kind of stick to the norms that we've had in our democracy. But when people watch how Republicans have eroded so much of our democracy over the last couple of years for absolute power, to absolutely control as much as they can in terms of the levers of power in this government, a lot of Democrats and a lot of activists that I hear and speak to and follow are saying it's time to push back. It's time to say that if we do get power, we are going to do exactly what Republicans have done, because the name of the game is no longer about trying to be in the middle of the road and trying to appeal to this like centrist part of the country, but rather to say this is how we're going to govern to try and preserve what semblance of a democracy we have left. And so it'll be interesting to see if that actually resonates with voters come the midterms. All right, we're going to switch gears now into the biggest sporting event in America. But we're not going to talk about that as much because tensions tonight are actually surrounding not what's happening inside of the stadium, but what is going on outside. And not even the highly anticipated halftime show, which has been drawing a lot of questions as well. At this hour, protests are expected outside Levi Stadium in Santa Clara against Trump's aggressive immigration enforcement efforts nationwide. This comes amid concerns over potential ICE activity at the game after DHS said that they are providing additional security. The NFL's chief security officer shut down those talks, saying there will be no ICE or Border Patrol operations at Levi Stadium. MS Now reporter Jake Traylor joins us from outside the stadium in Santa Clara, California. It's good to have you with us, Jake. So, a lot of speculation today, a lot of fear that there may be some type of immigration enforcement operation. What are you hearing from local officials? What's the mood like there outside of the stadium?
Yeah, guys, look, tens of thousands of people from around the world have gathered into Levi Stadium for the kickoff, which is in any moment. There are thousands of community members here. This is a strong immigrant population in the San Francisco Bay Area that are fearful that ICE may still show up. MS Now had the chance to exclusively catch up with the San Francisco mayor, the Santa Clara mayor, and we asked them really what their messaging was to the residents here that are fearful. We talked to one individual who said she was staying at a hotel because she was afraid ICE would show up on her doorstep. The mayor's message was that they have been in constant contact with U.S. officials, that they are confident there will not be ICE surges that are present here today at the Super Bowl. But that has not stopped community organizers from having protests. The largest anti-ICE protest of the whole weekend is expected to take place any moment now in conjunction with kickoff right outside of Levi Stadium. One of our producers, Alex Trowbridge, is inside the stadium right now. He ran into a Patriots fan in a No Kings shirt. That person said that they are a Patriot in a couple different ways. Take a listen to what they had to say.
Well, it's kind of nice that it sort of goes with the Patriots theme here. I'm not suggesting that Patriots all see this, but we are the New England Patriots. As a Patriot, I am myself, view it as important that we don't have kings. This is just a public venue. I'm not interested in people taking over things like this. I want sports to be fun. Sports are for everybody. I'm not going to, be incredibly loud, but I can have a shirt and support that view.
Now, protests are expected to get underway truly any moment now in conjunction with that kickoff. I do want to highlight one thing, though. 15,000 towels that say ICE out have been passed out by community organizers. These were handed out to fans as they are prepared to enter the stadium. They asked that the fans would raise them every time a penalty is thrown tonight to send a clear message to the Trump administration that ICE is not welcome in this community. Guys.
All right, Jake Traylor, thank you for that update. We'll see whether or not the fans actually heed that from the activists. Really appreciate it.
All right, we are going to turn now to Minneapolis, where protesters clashed with local police on Saturday, which marked 1 month since the killing of Renee Good. The confrontation happened outside the Whipple Federal Building, which has basically been the central hub for demonstrations against the Trump administration's aggressive immigration enforcement campaign there in the Twin Cities. The protests come as MS Now reports the Trump administration directed the Minnesota FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office to shut down a civil rights investigation into Renee Good's killing. They instead wanted officials to look into Good for possible criminal liability. Joining us now to discuss all of this is Mary Moriarty, Hennepin County attorney and former chief public defender of Hennepin County. Mary, it's good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So, given all of that I just spelled out in the background, walk me through what local law enforcement officials like yourself are doing right now to investigate and preserve the evidence surrounding both the killing of Renee Good, but also Alex Preddy, despite what federal officials may have in mind.
Right. And I think pointing to those protests is good because we heard, of course, from the administration that there was going to be a drawdown of at least 700 ICE agents. That would leave 2,300 here. We've seen no let up. in our community here. So people continue to rise up and protest in nonviolent ways. As to the news that the administration told the FBI to shut down the Renee Good investigation, that's not a surprise to us. In fact, that's what we heard. I had talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the BCA, that's our State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. We were all on the same page after Renee Good was shot and killed that there would be a joint investigation. And that's usual. That's how we all work together. And so when the BCA got kicked out, we were told that that was a message direct from Washington. And so now that's just being confirmed, but it certainly wasn't a surprise to any of us here in Minneapolis.
Mary, you mentioned that so far the ICE CBP immigration official presence has not really let up on the ground there. I know that you and a league of other prosecutors, local prosecutors from around the country, have created I forget what FAFO stands for in the context of your group.
Fight Against Federal Overreach.
Thank you. Not the usual FAFO that our audience may be thinking of. I'm wondering what you and other prosecutors in this group, including the Philly DA, who we had on last night, can do to actually change the incentives on the ground for these federal law enforcement officials to ensure that they don't misbehave, they don't break the law, and they don't put the lives of Minnesotans at risk.
That group actually met in Washington, D.C. this Friday. I was out there and we shared ideas about how to hopefully deter something like what's happened here in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities from happening. So it was a great meeting. We talked about a number of topics, including how to make sure that there are safe and fair elections. So, one of the important things that I shared with other people, because I think we're the first to experience some of these situations where the federal government is just refusing to investigate, is to be prepared. Anytime anybody comes in here into a state or state jurisdiction and commits a crime under state law, they can be prosecuted. However, there are some federal overlays there. In other words, a case that we may charge will be removed to federal court. There would be a motion to dismiss on immunity grounds. But I want to emphasize that does not mean there's absolute immunity. I know the administration was saying that, but there is no such thing. And so it's important to be prepared for this happens because, when we heard the administration say to ICE agents and Bovino say to ICE agents, nobody can lay a hand on you. You have absolute immunity. And I can't help but think that that conveys a message to them that they can do anything that they want to, which is not good, obviously, because we've seen all kinds of what appears to be unlawful behavior. So the idea is for all of us to be prepared and work with local police forces, by the way, because at least in Minnesota, our county attorney's offices, which are called DAs everywhere else, get cases from local law enforcement. So local law enforcement has to be prepared to investigate when they see something that may be unlawful and to submit it to our office for potential prosecution. So that's something that we can all do to be prepared. But I think the message is clear. You as a federal agent cannot come into a local jurisdiction and commit crimes. If you do, local prosecutors will be prepared to charge if it is a criminal offense, and we will go ahead with prosecution.
But how do you do that if the feds are withholding evidence from you, as it sounds like is the case in the two killings of Minnesotans recently?
Yes, it makes it more difficult, but as I've said repeatedly, our office receives cases every day that aren't perfect with not everything that we would like to see in an investigation. In both the Preddy shooting and the Good shooting, we opened up a public portal and we've received a lot of really helpful information. We in the BCA is working with us on investigations in both of those cases and a third case where a man was shot in the leg by an ICE agent. They are still doing interviews. We're collecting evidence. In those cases, we do not have, for instance, the gun. But it's not a mystery as to how both of those people died. Certainly, we would want to have all that information, but ultimately, we will look at everything we have and we will make a decision as to whether charges are appropriate. And I'm confident at this point that we will have enough information in both of those cases to make a decision.
Mary, if I could ask you, what are the kind of best practices since Hennepin County and Minnesota were among the first in the country to have experienced these tragedies and are now part of this league of DAs that are fighting back, including Philadelphia, who we mentioned. If you could think of like what is the best practices for other cities that may be experiencing this in the months and years ahead, what is the first thing you would tell them to be prepared that perhaps you yourself were not necessarily aware of, given the fact the way the federal government kind of ambushed Minneapolis and LA and Chicago?
Yeah, this is something I shared with my colleagues in D.C., including Larry Krasner, that they should be having conversations with their local police forces right now. We had that conversation kind of after the fact. We were seeing all these videos, and there was some confusion on their part. Some of them felt like they didn't have jurisdiction. Some of them were, maybe listening to the administration about the supremacy clause, that kind of thing. And I made it clear to our local law enforcement, which is Minneapolis, and we have about 38 different jurisdictions of police chiefs, that they do have jurisdiction, that they can investigate. And yes, is it harder when somebody's wearing a mask or they might not tell you who they are? Yes, but you can actually arrest them. And one of the things I heard, which I do understand, is that local police are somewhat afraid that they may be arrested if they intervene, that they may be harmed. And one of the things that I've emphasized to them is they can see their community members be arrested and be harmed as well. And they need to think long and hard about the fact that they signed up to protect and serve their communities. So those are conversations I talk to my colleagues about, being prepared to have those conversations right now with your local law enforcement. So they are there at the scene. They see something that seems to be an unlawful use of force. They are investigating it, because to this point in time, and you've all seen various videos, we have not had a case submitted to us by local law enforcement. Having said that, we are also doing investigations on other cases that I'm sure all of you have seen in the news. But it's a lot. It's a lot to take on, and I think being prepared. Also understanding that it's not as easy as people think. It's like, hey, you've got videos, go file charges, or why don't you just go subpoena the records that you need? You can do that in state court, but you cannot do that in federal court. In other words, there's a process you have to go through. I never thought I'd ever have to hear this case, or TUI. It's the United States Supreme Court case, but you have to file a TUI letter. You have to make a request to a federal agency and make the case as to why you need the information that you're asking for. And that includes training records. It includes even the names of the federal agents who were involved. So that's a process, and we all need help, which we're getting and is available for anybody who's facing this. But it wasn't something that we were prepared to deal with, and now we are.
All right, Mary Moriarty, thank you so much. Really appreciate all your insights this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, signs of a midterm blue wave. Stu Stevens will help us break down what recent state election results and what they could mean for November. You're watching the Weekend Primetime on MS Now. All right, so we are less than a month away from the first midterm primaries, and Republicans are already sounding the alarm about their narrow split chamber control. But with recent state election results, that concern could turn into a nightmare come November. And you don't have to look any further than Louisiana, where Democrat Chastity Verrett Martinez pulled off a shocking, decisive victory in the state's House District 60 election that was actually against Republican Brad Daigle. Donald Trump carried that district by a 13-point margin back in 2024. And Martinez isn't an outlier. There's also Democrat Taylor Remitt, who recently flipped a reliably Republican state Senate district in Tarrant County, Texas. Again, that was a district that Donald Trump won by 17 points. Joining us now is Stuart Stevens, Senior Advisor to the Lincoln Project. Stuart, it's great to have you back on the show. Help us make sense of this. Are these Democratic upsets in Trump's districts a sign of what we could possibly see come November, or are they one-off anomalies based on specific races and specific flaws or characteristics in those races?
Yeah, that's a great question. Election results are data points. And I've always thought in politics, when you look at data, you sort of need to step back and say, if what I'm seeing, does it make sense with what I'm seeing in the world? And in this case, it does. I mean, what is it that Republicans are doing to attract more voters? For the life of me, I don't understand it. I don't know what the bargain is that you get with Republicans now. Usually in politics, you want a good message and a good messenger. I don't see that Republicans have either right now. And a perfect example is they thought they were going to improve their image in Minneapolis when they put out Tom Homan. I mean, really? Is that what it's come to? So I think it's a real problem. And, normally in politics, the way when you have situations like this is sort of a roadmap. You apologize. You say, we've made some mistakes. We're going to change. And that's just almost impossible for any Republican to do because Trump will call you out.
Stu, a lot of people were watching last night as Senator Ossoff spoke, and a lot of Democrats felt like he articulated something, like he was onto something in terms of what the message should look like. I want you to listen to some of his remarks, and then I'll ask you a question on the other side.
Now, you remember we were told that MAGA was for working class Americans. You remember that? But this is a government of, by, and for the ultra-rich. It is the wealthiest cabinet ever. This is the Epstein class ruling our country. They are the elites they pretend to hate.
Georgia is, of course, an incredibly important state right now, not just because of that race. We saw the raid in Fulton County. We know the president is sort of obsessed with Georgia and elections there. I'm curious what you made of his message. I think in particular, this idea of the Epstein class as a way to sum up so much of what's happening in the country right now really resonated with people. But what did you see in the speech?
Well, in my years as a consultant, I always thought one of the secrets to success is to work for really good candidates. And these are really good candidates that are winning out there. I mean, what happened on January 5th, 2021, when they elected 2 Democrats to the Senate in Georgia, I mean, that's just extraordinary. This is a race, I think, that in a moment that is going to be driven by passion. And it's interesting, if you look at Gavin Newsom's not a bad politician. After the 24 election, what was his immediate instinct? It was to attack Wright. He was going to have Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk on his show. And Democrats seemed to sort of like throw up on his shoes. So he changed. And now he's out there attacking Donald Trump in this very Trumpish way, and he's getting rewarded for it. The same with Ossoff. The same with the governor of Illinois. So I think that it's a mistake for Democrats to think that this is going to be a race that is going to be about kitchen table issues or price of gas or any of that. Yes, it is. But it's also about what is happening in the country. And you can't run away from that. You have to embrace it. And I think it's a chance for Democrats to really get something that for a long time they had, sort of a party of strength, the law and order party, because ICE is a lawless organization. And you should be for law and order, and I think it gives them a real moral upper hand.
I would argue that Democrats could seize the mantle not only of law and order, but of economic progress as well, given all of the things that this president has been doing to weigh on the economy through tariffs and otherwise. And actually, I do want to get your thoughts on how Republicans are sort of navigating all of that, because it seems like they have abandoned the effort to maybe give a sop to like affordability type issues and offer something to voters. Instead, it feels a little bit like they are doubling down on the racism, on the xenophobic rhetoric, exactly the things that seem to be driving away a lot of voters. Just as an example, in the Texas Republican Senate primary, the candidates have used Islamophobic rhetoric about Sharia law as a cudgel to go after each other. We saw this play out in 2018 when they couldn't run on health care, the number one issue in the midterm. So they started, scapegoating caravans coming over the border. I just wonder how effective you think that pivot is. If they can't talk about the economy, if they can't claim to be improving the material conditions of voters' lives, to just resort back to the worst angels of voters' nature.
Yeah, I think politicians to a certain degree are like athletes. When they get panicked, they try to do what they think that they do best. And I think that's what's happening now here. They are good at this stuff. They think, and they get a positive response in front of their people. So you got to talk about Sharia law or something, like it's if in Texas or Sharia law. I mean, at face value, it's ridiculous. But, you know, it's pretty easy to ask how it's working. Just look at independent voters. And, you know, we talk about having a third party in America. And in some ways we do, because independent voters are becoming such a large portion of our electorate. And Trump and Republicans are getting killed with independent voters. You know, when I look at these polls, I would take Republicans, the MAGA part of Republicans, which is, you know, 90% of Republicans, and I would just throw them out of the polls because they just pollute the sample and kind of confuse you. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to change them. So, you know, Trump has incredibly low numbers with independents, and there's nothing they're doing that's going to try to change that. And that's why you have all this stuff like, we're going to go to Venezuela and let's go to, you know, we'll go to Iran. Maybe we'll bomb somebody. We're going to help, attack protesters in Minneapolis, but we're going to help protesters in Iran. It's just sort of flailing around.
Off of Catherine's question about racial animus and the role it plays in our politics in this country, we, of course, saw the president post a very racist image of the Obamas online the other day. But then also we heard from Mississippi today, they have revealed in conversations with Park Service employees that it looks like they're trying to, this administration, remove part of the legacy, the story of what happened to Medgar Evers and his assassination by an avowed white supremacist. And I'm curious what this signals to you about the moment we're in as a country.
Yeah, look, when I wrote this book, It Was All a Lie, I said that race is the original sin of the modern Republican Party. In 1956, Eisenhower got 39% of the black vote. In 1964, Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act. He got 7%. So last November in Virginia, an African-American Republican nominee for governor got 7%. That's pretty much a straight line. And what happened with Republicans is we made a terrible mistake of not admitting that we had failed, though we did so in the Bush campaign to a certain degree. I mean, Ken Millman, the chairman of the party, went in front of the NAACP and apologized for the Southern strategy. But we never went through the hard work of why is it these voters don't support us? What is it that we're not doing because, I mean, voting is a voluntary act. It's an ultimate pure marketplace. And so they're doubling down on this stuff. And it's really a revival of the lost cause in so many ways. If you look at how they're trying to rewrite history about January 6th, that's straight out of the lost cause. And look, I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. I remember the night vividly that when Medgar Evers was assassinated. And let me tell you, if Byron de la Beckwith, the man who murdered Medgar Evers, if he found out that Donald Trump was trying to not call him a racist, he would sue him. He was a proud racist. And it was his essence. So it's just an absurd sort of failure it's never going to work. And, you know, I think it's a miss. I don't think this is where voters are.
Yeah.
Your average Mississippians aren't like this. You know, your average 18-year-old Mississippi kid would rather be a black rap star than Robert E. Lee. So I think they're completely out of touch with the electorate.
Stuart Stevens, thanks so much for your insights tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, another major red flag for Trump. Donald Trump isn't backing down from his claims that his economy is doing great. Take a listen to what he said about his economy in an interview that aired earlier today.
You said you inherited a mess from President Biden when it comes to the economy. But at what point is it on you? At what point are we in the Trump economy?
Oh, I'd say we're there now. I'm very proud of it. 5.6%. You know, we have a GDP of 5.6 despite a shutdown. We had a 42-day shutdown. I call it the Democrat shutdown.
To be clear, as far as I can tell, those numbers are made up. We don't even have data yet for GDP growth post-shutdown, so I don't know where those figures come from. But the measures we do have are somewhat less rosy. For example, U.S. job openings plummeted to their lowest level since spring of 2020, a pretty clear sign that the labor market is slowing down. Manufacturers are struggling, consumers still seem pretty bummed out, and voters are noticing. A new NPR and Marist poll finds that just 36% of Americans approve of Trump's handling of the economy, while 59% say they do not. Joining us now to discuss is Lydia DePillis, economics reporter at the New York Times. So, Lydia, thanks so much for joining us on Super Bowl Sunday of all days. So, you know, Trump is very ebullient about this economy. Voters do not seem to be quite so much. How do you explain that disconnect? How do you make sense of voters' views of the economy?
Yeah, we do have a really divergent economy right now. Although you're right that GDP data hasn't come in for the fourth quarter yet, the third quarter looked really good. And at the same time, the labor market is in a really stagnant spot. We've been talking about this for months, right? Nobody is hiring. Now, fortunately, very few people are laying off. So layoffs remain low, and unemployment, although it's been creeping up a little bit, is still at nowhere near catastrophic levels. So what you see is consumers and workers in one of the crankiest moods they've been in a long time, while businesses are putting out really rosy earnings projections and the stock market continues to hit all-time highs. So what is going on here? It's just this extremely K-shaped situation that we've been noticing for a while now. Those sentiment numbers are entirely a reflection of folks who do not have stocks in their retirement accounts. Those who are in the top share of people with stocks are feeling really great, and they should. And so that's the complicated landscape that we face.
So where is the vulnerability, if you will, in the American economy right now, right? Because Donald Trump always projects a certain aura of strength and everything is going well. And you just outlined some of the reason why we have this kind of split screen.
Yeah.
But if you were looking at this from just a purely economic point of view, where are the vulnerabilities in the American economy, or where are the red lights that are going off for you?
Sure. I mean, one reason that job growth has slowed down a lot is that labor supply has slowed down a lot because we've been admitting far fewer immigrants and the labor force participation rate has leveled off. So the closer you get to zero, right, that might not be a bad thing because we're still absorbing as many workers who are entering the economy, but it means you're getting pretty close to negative. And when that starts to happen, people get nervous and companies might start pulling back. They might finally say, we're going to actually cut people in a serious way. And that starts to take the air out of the consumer economy, which has been powering us through the past several years of even high interest rates and even a trade war. All of those things haven't taken a serious toll yet. That's what could really start to tip us down.
Can I ask you about what's happening with white-collar workers and the extent to which AI may already be reshaping our realities in the job market? Because just anecdotally, this is not my field of expertise. I feel like I'm starting to hear from more and more white-collar workers, the kind of people who maybe you would not spend a ton of time stressing out about their careers, people who work at Google or at Meta, starting to have concerns about their employment. Either they have been laid off or they're fearful of major shifts coming in fields that I think at one point they felt were very solid, that they were sort of sold this idea that if you went into companies like Google, like you would have a job for life.
Right.
And maybe that might not be the case anymore. What's your sense of what's real and what's not?
There's a lot of softness in the white collar economy. If you do something in the trades, you're probably pretty employable at this point in a solid and reliable way. But there's lots of reasons why there's softness in sort of professional and business services and tech, right? Like those fields did overhire a bit in the pandemic, and now those companies are tightening their belts. So that's one thing going on. AI is something that we are not sure is having a big impact yet, but it happens slowly and then it happens quickly. And a big thing that happened this past week, you might have noticed, was Anthropic released a tool that could replace a lot of the functions that big software companies use. And so could that result in mass layoffs? It certainly resulted in a gigantic dip in those stocks. So, you saw Amazon laying off 15,000 people, saying it was because of AI. Now, we don't want to overinterpret that narrative because it sounds much better to Wall Street when companies say they're laying off because of AI instead of because overhiring or just a shift in business strategy. So that's the kind of thing that we want to be careful of. But it's something we're really watching for because it could start to have an impact real fast.
Lydia, I want to ask you about a story that I think you wrote recently regarding state officials writing letters to the federal government over their concerns about how immigration enforcement actions may be affecting the local economy that they oversee, as well as tax revenues. Could you talk a little bit about the connection between these immigration enforcement actions and economic outcomes?
Yeah, so this stemmed from what people were starting to notice in Minneapolis, which was an intense chilling of activity that's starting to have a real toll for Main Street businesses across the Twin Cities, not just those who are undocumented, but people who just don't want to go out because they might be brown. And so you see businesses closing, revenues dropping, and this is not just like one or two in the immigrant corridors. The downtown, the mayor is noticing this. And so other state fiscal officers, so treasurers, auditors, controllers, started noticing this and said, like, you need to stop. This is not helpful. If you come to my state, we're not going to bear the costs of this. We don't want to bear those costs. And it's not just an immediate fiscal thing for tax revenues. Like, that's the right now story. The long-term story is we need these people. We need them to come here. We need them to stay because we need workers. We need consumers. And that's in states like, especially in the Northeast, for example, that could have a long-term impact.
Lydia DePillis, thank you so much for joining us
Lydia.
tonight. Good to see you. When we come back, we're going to talk to Puerto Rico Congressman Pablo Jose Hernandez about Bad Bunny's Super Bowl moment, what it means for politics and Puerto Rico.